The sun was setting over the vast expanse of the American plains, casting a warm orange glow over the small rural town of Willow Creek. Abigail, a young woman with a determined look in her eyes, stood outside the local general store, clutching a small suitcase to her chest. She had just arrived in town, and the dusty air was still settling on her clothes. As she looked around, she noticed a tall, rugged cowboy leaning against the post of the store, eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The cowboy, Ethan, was a man of few words, but his piercing blue eyes seemed to bore into Abigail's very soul. He was a homesteader, one of the many who had come to the American West seeking a fresh start and a piece of land to call their own. And Abigail, with her slender figure and determined jaw, was a mail-order bride, seeking a place to belong and a chance to start anew. The two had exchanged letters, and Ethan had agreed to marry her in exchange for her help on his homestead. It was a union of convenience, one that would secure his land and future, and provide Abigail with a roof over her head and a sense of belonging. As they stood there, the reality of their situation began to set in. Abigail felt a cold sweat break on her brow as Ethan's gaze lingered on her, his eyes seeming to undress her with every passing moment. She had expected a certain level of awkwardness, but the intensity of his stare made her feel like a wild animal, trapped and helpless. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to be sizing her up, his eyes narrowing as he took in her slender figure and determined expression. He had expected a sturdy woman, one who could help him with the chores and the cooking, but Abigail looked more like a city girl, one who would struggle to keep up with the demands of rural life. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, a crack in his stoic mask, but he quickly suppressed it. He needed this marriage. The deed was everything. The air was thick with tension as they stood there, the only sound the distant lowing of cattle and the creaking of the old wooden post beneath Ethan's elbow. Abigail felt a sense of trepidation wash over her, a feeling that she had made a terrible mistake. What had she gotten herself into? She thought of all the stories she had heard, of the women who had come out west and been treated poorly by their husbands. She thought of the isolation, the loneliness, and the back-breaking work that lay ahead. And yet, as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she saw something there, a glimmer of kindness, of decency, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she had made the right decision after all. She straightened her shoulders. She would not be a victim. She would prove her worth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in a warm, golden light, Ethan pushed off from the post and strode towards Abigail, his long legs eating up the distance between them. "Well, I reckon it's time we got married," he said, his deep voice low and rough, like the land itself. Abigail felt her stomach tighten as he took her hand, his calloused palm wrapping around hers like a vice. She felt a sense of trepidation, of uncertainty, as he led her towards the small church on the outskirts of town, the place where they would exchange their vows and seal their fate. As they walked, the only sound the rustling of the grass beneath their feet, Abigail couldn't help but wonder what the future held, and whether she had made a terrible mistake or a wise decision. Only time would tell. The church was a simple wooden structure, its white paint peeling in places, its steeple reaching towards the darkening sky. A single lantern burned inside, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The preacher, an old man with a weathered face and kind eyes, waited by the altar, a worn Bible in his hands. He nodded at them as they entered, his gaze lingering on Abigail for a moment longer than necessary. "You two ready?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of many weddings before this one. Ethan nodded, his grip on Abigail's hand tightening slightly. She felt her throat go dry, her heart pounding in her chest. She had traveled for 3 days by train, then another day by wagon, to reach this town. She had left behind a cramped room in a boarding house, a job that paid barely enough to eat, and a life that offered nothing but more of the same. This was her chance. She had to believe that. The preacher opened his Bible and began to speak, his words echoing in the small, empty space. He asked about love and honor, about sickness and health, and Abigail answered on instinct, her voice barely a whisper. She watched Ethan's face as he spoke his vows, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on some point beyond her shoulder. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the land, at the deed, at the future he had bought with this promise. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Ethan let go of her hand and turned towards the door without another word. He walked outside, leaving her standing alone in the lantern light, the weight of her new name settling on her shoulders like a stone. She was Mrs. Ethan Cole now. She just did not know what that meant yet. The late afternoon light slanted through the window, catching the dust motes that danced above the cradle. Ethan stood in the doorway, his knuckles white where they gripped the frame. He had come in from mending a fence, his shirt damp with sweat, the smell of earth and pine sap clinging to him. He meant to wash up, but the sight of Abigail stopped him cold. She was sitting in the rocking chair, their son nestled against her shoulder. Her head was bent, her lips moving in a whisper only the baby could hear. Her free hand rubbed slow, gentle circles on his tiny back. The deed to the land, the paper that had brought her here, was tucked in the strongbox, under the floorboards. In this quiet room, it felt as weightless as those floating specks of dust. He remembered the day she arrived, a stranger with a worn carpet bag and eyes that held a story she would not tell. He had offered her his name and his roof, a transaction as plain as any at the general store. He got a helpmate for the homestead. She got security. That was the sum of it. Now, watching her press a kiss to the baby's forehead, a fierce and tender thing, the arithmetic of their arrangement dissolved. What he felt watching her had no price. Abigail felt his presence before she saw him. A shift in the air, a stillness. She looked up, meeting his gaze across the room. For a week now, she had caught him looking at her like this, with a kind of arrested wonder that made her throat tighten. She had married Ethan for a roof over her head and a father's name for her child. Gratitude had been the limit of her feeling. But gratitude did not explain the quickening of her pulse when he came in from the fields, or the way she listened for the sound of his boots on the porch. It did not explain the deep quiet that settled in her chest when he was near, a quiet that felt like coming home after a long, lost journey. Ethan worked the field from dawn until the light failed, planting corn and potatoes where the ground was soft enough. Abigail brought him water and cold biscuits. Jacob strapped to her back in a sling he had fashioned from soft leather after watching her struggle with the old sheet. The baby seemed to grow heavier every day, and Ethan noticed the way Abigail's shoulders ached by evening, the way she rubbed her lower back without complaint. He started taking Jacob for an hour after supper, walking the boy around the cabin while Abigail sat alone, her hands idle for the first time all day. One afternoon, Ethan came in from the far field to find Abigail struggling to lift a sack of seed potatoes. Without a word, he took the sack from her and carried it to the garden's edge. She did not thank him. She simply nodded, and he saw something shift in her eyes, a crack in the careful distance she had kept between them. The summer sun burned away the memory of winter's cold. The corn grew tall, and Abigail's garden erupted in a riot of green beans, carrots, and defiant sunflowers. Jacob thrived, a sturdy baby who laughed at the clouds and grabbed at the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. Ethan found himself planning his day around the moment Abigail would bring the boy out to him in the field. He would wipe the sweat from his brow, take Jacob onto his lap on the plow horse, and point out a hawk circling overhead or the line of trees marking the creek. One Sunday, they hitched the wagon and went to the town social. Ethan felt the eyes on them, the same judging looks. But as they sat on a blanket under a spreading oak, Abigail unpacked a picnic, and Jacob crawled onto Ethan's lap to play with his watch chain. He saw Mrs. Pritchard watching from across the church lawn. He met her gaze, then looked down at his son and deliberately smiled. When he looked up again, the woman had turned away. The harvest was good. The crib overflowed with corn. The root cellar was full. On the night they finished storing the last of the potatoes, Ethan sat on the porch, too tired to move. Abigail joined him, Jacob asleep against her shoulder. The sky was a vast spill of stars. They sat in a silence that was not empty but full of the day's work done, of the child's quiet breath, of the land sleeping around them. Ethan looked at her, at the curve of her cheek lit by the soft light from the cabin window, at the absolute, unthinking care with which her hand supported Jacob's head. He realized with a jolt that he could not remember the last time he had thought of the deed to the homestead. The why of her coming, the transaction, the cold terms they had dissolved like frost in this sun. All that remained was the woman, the child, and the profound, terrifying peace of this moment. He did not speak. He simply reached over and laid his hand, rough and calloused, over hers, where it rested on the baby's back. She did not pull away. She turned her hand under his, and their fingers laced together in the quiet dark. "He's finally asleep," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She began to rise, careful not to jostle the baby, as a faint tremble ran through her fingers. "Let me," Ethan said, crossing the room in 2 long strides. He reached out, his large, work-roughened hands looking impossibly clumsy, yet they were infinitely careful as he took the sleeping infant from her arms. His fingers brushed against hers, a brief, electric contact that sent a shiver of awareness through her. He cradled his son against his chest, his expression one of awestruck reverence. He looked from the baby's face to Abigail's, his eyes searching for something. "You do that so easy," he murmured, "like you were meant for it." Abigail felt a cold sweat break on her brow as she met his gaze. "I wasn't," she said, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "I was scared. I am scared, most days." She wrapped her arms around herself, the confession hanging between them like a challenge. Ethan settled the baby into the cradle, his movements deliberate and gentle. He straightened and turned to her, his eyes never leaving hers. The space between them in the small room felt charged, like the air before a summer storm. "I was scared too," he admitted, the words foreign on his tongue, a hint of vulnerability peeking through his rugged exterior. A man didn't speak of such things, but he did, his voice low and rough. "Scared I'd fail at this, at all of it." He took a step closer, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. The scent of his sun-warmed skin, honest labor filled her senses, making her feel lightheaded. "I'm not scared of that anymore." "Why not?" Abigail asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she felt the weight of his gaze on her. "Because you're here," he said, his voice simple and honest, like a statement of fact. "Not because of the deed, not because of the bargain, just because you're here, in this house, making it a home." His words were a gentle breeze on a summer day, soothing and calming. Abigail's breath caught, her heart skipping a beat. The last of her defenses, the wall she'd built around her heart from necessity, crumbled into nothing. She felt a sense of freedom, of release, as she reached out, her hand finding his fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, a sense of belonging washing over her. There were no more words needed, no more doubts or fears. The contract was forgotten, burned away by a quieter, more profound understanding that passed between them in the silent room, with their child sleeping peacefully beside them. What remained was not duty, but a choice, renewed every day, to stand together on the land they now shared in every way that mattered.